Not yet. Morning. Are we live? Do we no? Oh, you already see me there. Okay. Can you check if we have sounds, just to make sure that people are listening to what we're saying here? Yes. Okay. All right. Okay. So today we'll discuss one of the possible approaches to collective intelligence. That is this approach of the wisdom of the crowds, right? I don't know how far you went on reading Surovecki's book. My intention was that you had read until now at least the introduction and the first chapter. I know that we have a lot of reading to do, and you'll have to find the time to do the reading. We will not discuss the remaining of the book in this course, but the idea is that after you have that first introduction to his ideas, that you find it exciting enough, and whenever you have time, possibly during the Easter holiday or whatever, you can go and read further, right? But it will give us an idea of one of the approaches. I would have to say that this is not even the most accepted approach academically so far, because as you could probably notice, this is not an academic book, right? I would call it more like a sort of a bestseller, right? It's a book that has some interesting arguments that make us reflect about the topic, but he doesn't provide us any scientific proof or evidence of most of his ideas. It's curious facts. We will actually try to even get to some of these results of the wisdom of the crowds during our class today. We'll use this class as a crowd and take some decisions. But I think it still lacks some more scientific evidence. And maybe that could even give you some hints on topics that you could study and discuss in your projects, academic projects, trying to work with ideas that are revealed in this book and that deserve this kind of academic evidence, additional academic evidence, right? I'm not saying that the ideas here are not good ideas. In fact, I think that they're very good. They're good, as we say, food for thought, good ideas for us to examine with a more scientific approach. But we as researchers will definitely have to go a step further than Surovecki went on his book. His intention was to talk to the general public, and in fact, he himself has done some research checking what authors and researchers have done here and there, right? But he's writing a free book, right? It's free writing on a topic, and therefore we have to take it with a little caution. Let me just, before we get into Surovecki's book directly, let me go back here to our Moodle page. I'm here in our Wisdom of the Crowds class. So we have today Surovecki's 2005 book, Introduction and Chapter 1. And then we also have here one of the texts that Surovecki himself mentions in the introduction of his book. It's a little paper. I would say that this is more like an academic paper, but an academic paper that was written in 1907. It still has a different format to the papers that we write today, but an academic paper in which this guy here, Galton, is trying to prove his ideas. And one of the interesting things about this paper, let me just get to it. I think this is it here. The way I got it directly from the internet. I only got acquainted with this work through Surovecki's work, which means that the internet is already working there as a means of putting the collective intelligence to work, because it allows us to jump from Surovecki's ideas to the guy who inspired him somehow, right? And so this was what I found on the web, this text of Francis Galton, first published in Nature in, it's actually, well, it says here that it was published in 1949. I don't, but no? What number? Okay, number 1949 doesn't mean, okay. But anyway, and then here Galton is actually trying to prove that the average is mediocre, that the average of our, if we average our intelligence, we will get to something that is not good. It's his idea, his assumption was that there's always in a community, in a group of people, there are always people that are cleverer, and those people that are cleverer or more intelligent or whatever should be assigned the decisions because they would be able to take better decisions than the average. That was actually Galton's assumption, and that was what he was trying to prove, right? When he, in one of his late experiments in life, I think he was already 80 or something when he did that, he proposed that challenge to the crowds that were visiting a farm, a farm fair, a fair about cattle and things. He proposed the challenge of this crowd finding out the weight of an ox, right? And in fact, it was even a little more difficult than that, that he wanted people to guess the weight of the ox after being cut into pieces and turned into meat that would be sold at the butcher, right? So that was, of course, any one of us who's seen a cow knows that a cow weighs more than we do, so we already have an idea of, okay, maybe it weighs 3, 4, 5 times more. Some of us will be more precise than others on that. But then thinking about after you take all the, the leather and all the fat and everything, what is left, it's probably a little different. And this was a particularly atypical ox because it was a really big one, right? But anyway, the challenge was there. He asked each person that visited the fair to take a guess for a prize. Money, love, or glory is always there, right? So people were putting some effort into that because there was some sort of reward. And at the end, when he tabled all the results, the difference between the actual weight of the ox and the average of everyone's guess was just, I don't remember, just 1 pound, I think, not even 1 kilo. So it's 500 grams, right? That made him puzzled because he was trying to prove the opposite. And probably in that case, not even the best specialist would have been able to have given a better guess than the average of the people. His arguments here, and it makes sense from a statistical point of view, is that when we have the ability of providing informed or taking informed decisions, we all take into consideration the information that we have, plus and that there is also some error in our decision. And if we can assure that all those involved in taking those guesses have their own information and a bit of error, and if this group is, let's say, random in a statistical way, that some will commit an error in one direction and others will commit the error in the other direction, the information will all be there and the errors will cancel each other. Right? I think it makes sense. It definitely makes sense from a statistical perspective. Of course, we will have to deal with a lot of challenges there. That is, first, ensuring that the sample that we're using, I mean the intelligent decision makers that are taking part in the decision, that they are not biased somehow. Because if they are all biased, and if they're biased the same in the same direction, that means that our result will be biased in that direction as well. But if we can assure, and that has always been the challenge of statistics in general, to make sure that when you get a sample, that sample is representative of the population that you want to represent by it. Okay? But in this case, in Galton's Vox Populi, the wisdom of the crowds, he was able to get that. People that were participating in that, in voting for checking, for trying to guess the weight of that ox, they were not biased towards any direction. They had no reason to try to put the values up or down, all of them in the same direction, and therefore he was able to manage the errors that one committed in one direction to be cancelled by the errors that happened in a different direction. Okay, I don't want to spend a lot of time on Galton's paper, because I think it's reviewed by Surowiecki in a more, let's say, in a way that is more, it's easier for us to read just a few years later than 100 years later, right? So I will not spend too much time on this. Let's go back here to the other. Oh, and then we have another interesting, before we get to Surowiecki, we also have here this Breen and Page paper that may have excited some of the computer science guys in the class, and probably was found very dull for people that have other backgrounds. Well, you probably guessed that Breen and Page are the guys who started Google, right? And what is being described here in the anatomy of a large-scale hypertextual web search engine is actually how Google was able to benefit from the crowds to perform the miracles it makes. I usually say that when we don't know something and we want to have a quick answer, we go to the great oracle, right? Google. We write a few words there, and suddenly, miraculously, truth comes in front of our eyes, right? This is the truth of the crowds, right? Larry Page's and Breen's algorithm, the only thing it does is actually organizing the thoughts or the ideas or the decisions that all humans that have ever included a web page on the web have put into building the internet as the way it is, you know. And the idea here is quite simple. You know, if I build a web page and my web page has links to other pages, it means that I consider my page to be, I would not say inferior to those other pages, but that I consider that those pages are good references for the topic that I am talking about. And in fact, if they are not referencing me, if it's just me, my page that is referencing theirs, it means that they are higher in the rank somehow, right? So by just organizing the links on the web, the algorithm that is explained in this paper, which, by the way, I find to be a horrible paper in terms of, if they had proposed it to the journal that I'm the editor, I would ask for a lot of reviews, right? There's a lot, and hopefully I wouldn't have rejected it. There's a chance that it would have been rejected. You know why? Let's have a look at it here and give you. Have a look at the abstracts of this paper. What do we usually expect in the abstract of an academic paper, considering that we are all here doctoral students, master students, or some IC student, how to say, introduction to science, as we call here in Brazil, students, what is the problem with this abstract? What do we usually have to have in an abstract of a paper? The context, okay, if we have room for that, Carla, yeah, if we have room, we should write something about the context, right? Or, yeah, if we have room, the problem is that sometimes we have, well, this is a generous abstract. They have here some 10, 15 lines, right? Here there is room for some content, for some context, for sure, right? But there are other things that should definitely be there. The objective, for sure. The objective has to be there. What is the objective of this paper, right? The reader of an academic paper reads the abstract first, because the abstract makes us decide if we're going to read the paper or not. Not because it's a good paper or it's a bad paper, but because it is interesting for the research that we are doing or not, right? So the objective has to be there, and it has to be very clearly stated, right? So that's one thing. Check there if you see the objective clearly stated in this abstract. But the objective is not the only thing. What else do we have to have there? Methodology. Methodology is very important, right? We may have a very interesting objective. For example, finding out if there is intelligent life in Mars, right? We probably already know that there isn't, but let's say maybe we have some reason to believe that it's somewhere very hidden there, and we were not able to see it yet, okay? So that's a good objective, but it can only be a good objective if I find means of carrying out that research that are acceptable to the readers, that are other researchers or other people that have to be convinced that what I'm proposing is important, is good, right? And therefore, we have to have a method that is coherent with the objective that we had. I'm not saying that they didn't have an objective or they didn't have a method. Well, they built one of the softwares with the largest impact on life in this planet, right? At least on human life in this planet. So, but is the methodology here clearly stated? That's another question. And the third one, the results, right? Clearly stated results, right? I have the feeling that this abstract does much more of contextualizing, and it also says, let's say, it says what it does, right? When they say here, in this paper we present Google, a prototype of a large-scale engine, they're saying what they have as maybe the result is here, right? But it's more like a descriptive result. The objective should be or could be expressed in a clearer way to make sure that the reader was able to understand what the purpose, the real purpose was. So the objective could be, for example, to try and or to check if by checking this the hierarchy of hyperlinks on the web could lead to a better way of showing relevant results to users than the methods that were being used before Google by Yahoo, Excite, I don't know, the other companies that were around, Alta Vista and whatever, the companies that were around in the late 90s before Google was introduced, right? And then having that clear objective, they could say how they would convince us that their method was better, and then they would present their results. So those were the changes that I would ask those two guys as academics to do in their paper before they were published. So not a very good example, in my opinion, of the format of a paper, so don't take these as the way you should write your papers. But a good, let's say, a good example of how the wisdom of the crowds can be used because we see here, we understand here the way they organized the way our brains and our little decision making as individuals, they organize the way that they can all sum up to build this incredible thing that is the Google search mechanism. Okay? So we're not going to deal, in fact, I'm not a very I don't have a very technical profile nowadays, so when I started getting to some of the mathematics here, I also felt like skipping it. But some of my colleagues here in the informatics department told me that there is even a mistake in one of the formula that is there. I don't want to try and figure out what it is, but anyway, it's there for those who are more techy. If you want to check, maybe go and come back, and I can even tell who you should discuss that with if you want that as a challenge. It's not our purpose here, and besides, we are not interested in diminishing the work of these two guys who have proved to be much more successful in business than they could even expect to be in academia, right? Okay, so then we have another small paper here by Surowiecki. It's just I'd say it's just a summary of the 2005 book. We shouldn't worry too much about that. I included here some interesting talks about researchers that are dealing with swarm intelligence. So when you have a time, if you haven't had yet, have a look at that. I also included some other links and some other interesting links to Wisdom of the Crowds. And notice that this is here as a wiki. So please, whenever you find anything that is interesting, you can just include your own links here. As I've been telling you since the first day of this class, this class becomes much richer when you contribute to the content that we have here. We don't want you to read and watch everything that is linked here, but we want this to be a good reference for you, not only during this course, but even after the course. You'll see that probably when you get there, you'll see that sometimes there are people that contribute to some of our discussions that are not even part of the class now. There are some 200 people that have already either taken the class the year before, or this is the third time that we have this course, right? So, and sometimes they get there, and I notice that some of mainly the concepts that we have, someone includes some better definition for us there, and that all will help us all understand the topic better, right? So I always say this: don't forget when you're doing your reading, when you're reading the papers that we assign here in class, or when some of the papers that you're reading lead you to do some other research on the web or in one of the scientific databases that we have access to, and you find something interesting, bring it to this wiki here, the Building Knowledge Together, right? Make sure that you include terms here in our important definitions, or maybe make sure that you include bibliography that you find relevant here. If each one of us includes one reference or one important definition every week, we are some 30 people taking the course now. That means that we'll have 30 or 40 every week, and that will build up so that when you find something, oh, I don't know exactly what that is, you look at the important definition that we have. Hopefully you will already find it here, and hopefully it will be in blue, because whatever is in red here means that we were kind enough with our colleagues to say, well, this term needs a definition, but maybe we didn't have the time or the energy to include a definition for that, right? Okay. Let me try and go back here to. Now I'm lost. Let me try to go back to collective intelligence and to our class, wisdom of crowds. And let's go back to the book, The Wisdom of the Crowds. Before I go any further, do you have any, what were your impressions about the contents? Was there anything that you thought that you couldn't think of, or was different, or somehow surprised you? Or?
Surprising results.
The results are definitely surprising, right? But think about that. Think about the submarine. That they had all these different people, each one with some little bit of information, but it was really very little information. Let's say very little information and possibly a lot of error. But they still. Any other
Think of the challenger in the space that was firing, and then the stock exchange market immediately.
Remember, I think it was you. It's Marco, right? You were the ones, one of the people that were talking about prediction markets, right? And I think some people in the first. Okay, so prediction markets. Now you start understanding how prediction markets work or can work.
It was fun because I'm starting financing in Italy, and was really even people that probably don't know really well could predict this kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
But it was out of the four people that was building the
spacecraft or
spacecraft exactly. It was just this one, the one that made an error in the construction.
You know, sometimes I'm a little concerned that some of the results to which we get by means of the wisdom of the crowds become what we would call a how would I say that in English? A profecia autorrealizável. You forecast the future, and then that becomes the future, right? So. That part of the spacecraft, I was thinking, gee, we know that our scientists do very amazing things, but sometimes we think, were they really able to figure out that part relating to that company was the cause, or they thought, maybe they thought, well, that's the easiest way to go now is to go the same way as everyone else's opinion is going. I don't know. So. We have to, as I said, the wisdom of the crowd still needs to be a lot, still deserves a lot of research, right? It definitely, when we think about stock markets, for example, and the putting prices to companies based on their results, what we are actually doing, each one of us who negotiate shares in the stock market, what each one of us is doing is actually expressing our beliefs about the future of that company and about the capability of that company to keep providing us with the profits that we wished. If we think that there are other options, other better options in the markets, we sell our shares and buy the shares that we think that are better, right? And when everyone is doing that, we are actually working as a crowd. Mm-hmm. So that's also, something that.
But even if the statistics prove that this works this way, even that we won't realize how it works, because the statistic proves that this is like this.
Mm-hmm.
But what makes these things act like this?
No, well, I think his what Carl is saying here is that statistics, with this idea that each one of us has part of the has information and also commits some misjudgment or or has some error, and if we are not biased, each one is going to have an error in a different direction. It will cancel each other. Statistics gives us some good arguments in favor of the wisdom of the crowds. But what I understand you're trying to say is, but can we?
Prove what makes people act this way. You have, these people acting and thinking.
Yeah, let's say statistics doesn't allow us to anticipate what the result of the collective intelligence will be. That's what you mean?
There's a phrase that it's better to preview what people will do
Uh-huh.
than ask them. Okay, and I think this works because in elections and voting, for example, it's better you preview by all the information you have than to ask them.
Yeah, in fact, we do a lot of census to collect data. For example, here in Brazil, we have every 10 years. I think we still do have, right? Every 10 years, we have a census in which every family in the country is visited, and then they ask about all different things that are important for government to take decision afterwards, right? What the wisdom of the crowds shows us, and statistics had already, already shown us before, is that we don't need to have a census in order to get good information about a population, right? And we usually don't do it because a census is a very expensive way of getting that information, right? But at the same time, I don't know if we can escape having the census for other reasons than statistical. You know, like people say, no, but we want to make, you know, sometimes it's a political matter. It's a matter of it's a matter of statisticians rule in some. They're very precise in many cases, but we don't want to give them all the credit all the time, right? All right. Let me have a look. I have made a few remarks here, and I still have it in a paper copy here. It makes it easier for me to find some of the things that I found interesting and that I wish to discuss with you. First of all, it's that interesting thing that when Galton had his study, he wanted to prove the opposite. This is a very good thing for us to think as researchers, because we're usually so sure about our hypothesis that we find all the evidence that we can to prove it, and we sort of push under the rug, you know, the evidence that would go against our assumptions, right? I'm not saying here that we're doing that in a dishonest way. I'm saying that we usually do that without even noticing, right? When we do our literature review, for example, for our studies, we do it in a way that there are a few things that call our attention because they support our arguments. And so we tend to pay attention to things that call our attention. And then there are other things that we start reading and they don't call our attention because they're not supportive to our ideas, right? So we have to, the first thing that we have to try and do is to escape this trap of being, you know, caught on our own ideas. And Galton was able to notice that and even to change his mind. And in fact, maybe one of the things that make science different to religion is that we don't have any dogmas, any ideas that we cannot challenge. We should challenge all our ideas, right? But it's difficult because there are some ideas that are ideas that we use to think our other ideas. It's sort of metaphysical, right? Some ideas are are the grounds on which we build our new ideas, and therefore they are not questioned either. So I think it's a little fallacious to say that science doesn't have its own dogmas, right? And we have to be very careful about that. One of the ways that I have been trying to work with my students lately with respect to literature review is that we always try to do a systematic literature review. We don't do a, let's say, a flexible literature review. I don't know how I'd call it. A literature review where I just start reading something and that takes me to another text and then to another text. We don't use the snowball, because the snowball tends to lead you to more. If you found something that confirms your idea, you'll get more of the same, right? So what we try to do is get the expressions that could be important for researchers that are studying a specific topic, and then we use those expressions in building the corpus of our research, right? And so we use that to select papers, for example, that will be considered, and then we analyze all of them. We may still filter some of them off because it's not just 2 or 3 expressions or that will tell me that something is important to me, but we try to frame it in a way that we are not reading only the things that we would like to read, right? But it's still, I'd say that there's still a good chance that we're biased there. So, but it was good to notice here that even in 1907, Galton was already being able to do science the way we should do. When we find something that is different to what we believed, we keep investigating. And we try to make sense of the results that we got and try to escape what we call in science the Hume's problem, which is the problem of accepting as truth something that has been taken as truth before, just because of induction. For example, I usually say that we assume that if we take, let's say, this bunch of sheets of paper here, and I keep them loose, that they will fall, right? Gravity is something that we have experienced in the past, and we believe that we'll experience in the future. But is this such a general rule as we think it is? Or the great architect may switch a switch somewhere, and then suddenly, if I throw this, it will go up, right? Well, I don't want to become too philosophical in this discussion here, but that already makes you understand the kinds of assumptions that we have. Things that happen in the past and happen in a consistent way become truth that we do not escape from, or we do not challenge, and that's a problem also for science. Okay. What else we have here? Okay.
We're talking about the other authors that were on the text.
I don't remember what I was doing. Anyway, well, the other authors that were
in the text, most of them also did as Galton. They assumed that
in general that's what in general that's what happens with yeah. Okay. Anyway, now I got to the numbers here. The people that were trying to guess the way how much the ox weighed, they got to 1,197 pounds. It was actually 1,198, and I just noticed that I forgot to put my power supply to this computer here, and this is not a good thing because it's going to go off if I don't do that. Can you put that there? Oh, sure. There's it's easier, definitely. Let me see if this is working. I think so. Yeah. Okay. So very precise. One other thing that Surowiecki says here is that we tend to use as humans what we tend to go for a boundedly rational decision. This was already Herbert Simon's saying. We here in academia we discuss Simon's ideas about this what he called boundedly or rationality or limited rationality as the fact that we don't have all the information that we would like to have to take a decision as humans. I remember I once had a teacher who told us that this is challenging even in the very important decisions in life. For example, how to choose a girlfriend or a boyfriend, right? You don't have access to the whole population. You only have the access to a sample, right? That's a first problem, but we look for a logic, a compromising logic there. We want a sufficing logic, right? At the same time, the object that we are assessing, evaluating, is trying to cheat, because it's the other part is always trying to convince you that, or show you to be better than, well, not better than it is, but it's always trying to impress you, the same way as you're trying to impress. So it's a decision that is taken also with some fake information in the middle or some, right? There are time constraints, right? You can't wait forever to take that kind of decision, right? What else? See that there are lots of issues there that do not allow us to take a decision with perfect information, right? And we still decide with this idea of what I call a sufficing logic. When I told my wife about this, she said that I was not being very romantic, and I said, well, I guess not, but but when we take this kind of decision, well, I liked you when we met, you probably liked me somehow, right? We compared to a sample, but it was just a sample. We were not able to compare to the whole population. What we have to do now is we have to keep competitive against the other sampling opportunities that appear along life, right? So we'll have to keep competitive somehow. But anyway, this is what they call here this boundedly rationality, and the main author in this that discuss about the problem that we are not there. We as humans are not there for an optimal solution. We are there for an acceptable solution in most of our decisions. Was Herbert Simon, right? And it's good that we act like that as humans, because otherwise, I don't know, a lion would have eaten us the first time that we were face to face with the lion, right? Because we would be there thinking about the best way of escaping that situation, and and we would not be able to analyze all possibilities before the lion had already, in a much more impulsive way, had already attacked us, right? Not that there is much that I think that we could do if we were faced directly with a lion, except maybe follow Akira Morita's suggestion. Morita was the founder of Sony, and do you know the story about Morita's?
Yeah, I kind of remember when I was in Italy.
About his putting the sneakers.
Yeah,
yeah. Exactly. Yeah. He wrote in a book that when he and colleague of his, an American, were there in a safari, and then they suddenly saw this lion in front of them. He very quickly started getting his sneakers from his backpack and put his sneakers on, and the American was saying, "You're stupid, you know, do you think that you're going to run faster than the lion just because you are going to put your sneakers on?" And he said, "No, I don't want to run faster than the lion, I just want to run faster than you." Right? So that was to explain how Sony dealt with some of the situations, some of the decisions it had to take in its previous years as a company, when there were many other larger companies in the market, and then they had to just try to be faster than them and not necessarily wiser or faster than the lion. But anyway, so our decision individually, we are all taking these decisions that are sufficient, but are not necessarily the best. And that's and he thinks that maybe each one of us taking a decision that is sufficient to us includes some error there, but that error can be cancelled by other people's errors in different directions, because their sufficiency logic is different to ours. What else have I marked here? Well, there's definitely a lot of people, and Surowiecki mentions them all here, that claim and even alert us about the possibility of not the intelligence or the wisdom of the crowds, but the stupidity of the crowds, right? And I myself have experienced that a few times. I remember that once I lived close to Curitiba Football Club's stadium, and after the end of the game, there was this huge crowd coming out of the stadium, and for some reason that, you know, I, that was not involved, could not understand, they were all walking on top of the cars. They found it probably funny to just walk on top of the cars, right? Of course, damaging all the other people's properties, doing things that people would definitely never do if they were on their own. But which, not that it's acceptable, but which they found that they could do being in a group like 100 people or so, right? So that's what we could call collective stupidity, and it happens more often than we would think, right? And if we want to explore the possibilities of collective wisdom, the wisdom of the crowds, we will have to try and find ways of avoiding this kind of situation in which, instead of the intelligence of the crowds, we get the stupidity of the crowds. In fact, I think right now we are in a moment, for example, when we think about the internet, or even the way that we use our mobile phones to interact with other people, there's probably much more stupidity there than intelligence. We'll probably have what we'll have to do, but it's because I believe, being an optimist, I believe that this is because we're learning, right? We've already talked in our previous class about the fact that, remember McKenna's broadcasting, we were exposed for broadcasting for so long. So for so long, someone had our mouth shut. We couldn't express our feelings, we couldn't express our ideas. And now we have technology that allows us all to broadcast. And in fact, it's not even it's broadcasting, but at the same time, it's a broadcasting in both directions. So we all became broadcasters, and we don't have we have not developed ways of separating, to which of all these channels we should tune in. And we as individuals have also not developed a good sense of when we should talk and when we should listen. I think that we should probably listen much more often than we talk. My grandmother said that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth because we should listen twice as much as we talk, right? It seems right now that humanity got technology that made us have 5 mouths and no ears, right? Because whenever someone says something that is different to what we agree, we just pretend that we didn't hear, or we actually don't hear, right? So I think the same way as Google was able to provide us with the knowledge of the crowds in its first version, which is the Google search engine, we now would need some other sort of, it's either a technological engine or some learning from all the people that we should talk when we have something to say, and we should keep quiet when we don't. Right? I see that problem happening, for example, in most forums on the web. You have usually forums where people go and try to solve a problem they have. So they say, I have this problem. And then instead of having someone telling them how to solve the problem, they have some 10 people answering, saying, well, I don't know. You know, if you don't know, why are you creating noise here? Keep quiet, right? And I don't know, but I would guess, and then that guess is completely out of sense, right? I don't know how we'll solve that. Maybe it's going to be collective intelligence again, doing what, for example, is starting to happen with, well, Amazon is now using that. You vote on, you tell your impressions about a product that you bought, and then people vote saying if that was good for them or not, if that helped them take their decision or not. This ranking of other people's opinions may be a way of allowing us to make some sense of all the noise that is around in all our medias today. Right? But I don't know if that's going to be the way, if it's going to be more technological, or if it's going to be more, still more based on collective intelligence. Again, we as little ants trying to build the hive, we as little ants there saying, well, I didn't like this, and putting it down, or this is good and putting it up, right? We've talked a little, and we'll talk a lot more during the next few classes about Web 2.0 as being this improvement in the way the web works, allowing people to be much more interactive than the internet was in its early days, let's say in the 90s and early 2000s. But now we could probably also start talking, and in fact we are starting to talk about Web 3.0, where folksonomy, where people will not only interact, but people will assess and evaluate this interaction in a much more intensive way than we have done so far, to try and make sense of the noise that is around. Srowiecki mentions 3 kinds of problems that can be dealt by means of the wisdom of the crowds: cognition problems, coordination problems, and cooperation problems. Right? Cognition problems, some of them will take a decision collectively, and that after we take the decision, we'll see if that was a good decision or not. Right? Some of them will turn out to have a precise, definitive answer, and we'll be able to compare it with the answer that we as a collective gave to the problem. In other cases, we also have some cognition problems that we are only looking for better ways, or for good ways of solving a problem, and it's impossible to say now or even in the future if that was the best solution. It's just a solution that was reached by the crowd as being a good solution for the problem, right? I find the coordination and cooperation problems interesting for us to differentiate, because we will see that we use collective intelligence many times in problems that relate coordination. And in other cases, the important issue there is cooperation. In some cases, you need both of them. But what would be an example of a coordination problem? What do you think of Uber? I have the need to go from here to my house. And there's someone who's driving a car and who's, well, at this stage it's not necessarily still going. Uber at this stage is more, it's almost like a taxi, right? And so it's not someone who's going from here to there. It will get to that stage, right? And then Uber is not going to pay anyone, or it's going to pay even less, because it will coordinate my intentions with the intentions of someone else to get a result that is good for both people, or for several people, right? So we can use a crowd to, and we can develop mechanisms to coordinate interests and coordinate efforts of crowds to build much bigger things than would be built individually. I think that well, he gives other examples here of coordination. Let me.
How do buyers and sellers find
Yeah, all the coordination problems require members of a group, markets, subway riders, college students looking for a party, to figure out how to coordinate their behavior with each other, knowing that everyone else is trying to do the same. How do buyers and sellers find each other and trade at a fair price? So here we could think, for example, of eBay, or here in Brazil, Mercado Livre, as being companies that are working on the use of that have a coordination problem to be solved, or that put together people that have a problem that can be solved by means of coordination. Making sure that the one who wants to buy finds the one who wants to sell. Okay? And the cooperation problem, right? It involves the challenge of getting selfish, right? People, distrustful people, to work together, even when narrow self-interest would seem to dictate that no individual would take part. So cooperation, in this case, means getting the selfish to become altruist, because working together they will get an improved results that will benefit everyone. Well, but for the crowds to provide us with good decisions, there are some conditions, or some preconditions, some requisites, right? At this this part of the paper, the author mentions diversity. Diversity is important because, remember, we want to get, if we're drawing a sample, the sample has to be representative of the population. So if I take a sample that does not have diversity, it will not represent the thought of, or the wisdom of the whole crowd. Independence. When we have a group where there is some hierarchy, or where there is some dependence on some people will decide based on what other people are doing, again you are sort of skewed you're diverted in the direction of the ideas of the ones from whom others depend, right? So in a hierarchical organization, it's difficult to have the wisdom of the crowds working. So in most of our traditional organizations, companies, the wisdom of the crowd will not work very easily, because usually the employee goes with the boss, right? What does the manager say? That's what we'll do. I don't want to go against the idea of my boss, because there may be some sort of retaliation, right? It's the principles of the hierarchical organization are a lot like Fred Flintstone's kind of organization, right? It's the boss knows and I obey, right? I don't challenge the boss's ideas. So if we don't have this independence, it's difficult that you will get to the wisdom of the crowds. It may be the wisdom of the boss, presented as being the wisdom of the crowds, because the crowds all vote with the boss, right? Think of our coronéis in Brazil and you know, all their currais eleitorais, right? The places where they get all their votes from. It's difficult for us to think that those people are voting in an independent way, right? Therefore, we're not going to get the best candidates to be elected. We'll get those who influence them too. Okay? Decentralization, right? A little like independence, not being it has a lot to do with dependence. I would say this is a structure that is more decentralized is a structure in which one part doesn't rely or depend on the other as well, right? And there's another part of here at the beginning of the text, the author mentions those three conditions, but then later on he also mentions aggregation, right? So I think that we should also consider that. And later on, I think on the next page, he also mentions that there are some rules that you have to have some rules to maintain order and coherence. And you have to have good communication, but not, this is interesting, but not too much communication among the decision makers. Why not too much communication? Good communication means that maybe if we provide our arguments for the remainder of the group, and if the remainder of the group understands that we are knowledgeable about that, we influence them, but we influence them in a way that they already had their information, and the information that we have makes them improve the quality of their information. But if we have too much communication here, maybe then you start imposing your opinions. For example, you're not going to say, maybe there is some Nirvana fan here that will know exactly the year in which Nirvana released that album that is mentioned in the text, right? What was that? I don't recall the name of the album now. But anyway, if there is any Nirvana fan here, don't say anything right now, because you will be... Never mind, yeah. You can see that I'm not a Nirvana fan. Never mind. But anyway, if there is someone who's a Nirvana fan, I will ask you that, and please don't Google it, right? Because we want I want every one of us has some information about Nirvana, right? We've heard about this band. We sort of know when they were more famous and everything, possibly. Maybe not all of us, but then someone will be less informed, others will be more informed. Someone will be very sharp. Someone will be able to say precisely the year when Nirvana released that album. But the thing is, let's say that one of us expressed himself saying, well, you know, I am a Nirvana fan, and I'm not sure exactly what the year was, But I remember that I went to their show, and I was still a teenager, and so that was between this year and that year. That will probably be considered a good information for the rest of the group. That will probably gauge their opinion, right? And this happens a lot and in fact, this is why many companies understand that working in groups is better than working individually. Mainly if you have groups that are sort of adhocratic, and then where the power flows depending on who has the knowledge at each time. The problem is that our organization, the hierarchical organization that we have as the standard in our at least in our economy, do not provide a lot of room for this what we call adhocracy, where the ones who are smarter or who have better knowledge at a specific topic are the ones that are in control at that right moment. And then when the topic changes, they say, well, look, this is now I have to follow because I'm not good at that, right? This goes back to that thing of we'll have to know when we have something to say and when we should only listen, right? We'll have to learn that, to do that, and maybe someone will develop tools that help us do that as well in the future. Okay. So good communication is good, but too much communication will allow those that are more eloquent, those that are better, that are stronger influencers to influence others, and sometimes they will influence others and make others believe that their idea is better when in fact it isn't. Okay, so we have to take care with this situation. Good communication, but not necessarily too much communication. I remember that when, I don't know, a few years ago, there was this it was like a game to prove that collective decisions are better than individual decisions. That I saw on the web. It was about going to the moon, and you have to think about the gadgets or the things that you should take in the mission, right? And then they gave you some 20 or 30 items, and you had to choose the most relevant ones. And then you did that originally in an individual way, and then you were put in groups, and in groups you would discuss, and after that discussion, the group would reach a decision. And I remember that I played that game with students many times, and the group decision was much closer to the decision that allegedly was NASA's suggestion, right? Why? Because each one in the group had an idea, look, it doesn't make sense to take this to the moon because there the gravity is different and whatever. Each one would think of a different thing, and a group, when you share ideas, when you communicate, you tend to have better results, except if you have people manipulating the group, and in case where you lose the independence, you don't have you don't have decentralization. It's centralized, and sometimes there's someone who monopolizes, right? Who, you know, that there are groups that do not work precisely because there is someone who talks too much, or who enforces his or her opinion on the others more often than the others do. So all of those things happen in the collective. Okay. He discussed a little bit the question of big or small groups, which ones are better. It's interesting that definitely small groups may be better for some kinds of situations. Large groups are good for mainly when we definitely want the wisdom of the crowds, right? The big crowds, right? Because of that, think of the errors being how do you say the errors being cancelled by each other. But there may be this is something that also I think requires further investigation. In which situations the wisdom of the crowds works better for larger or smaller groups. He mentions here that disagreement is better than consensus for the quality of a decision. And in fact, a group where everyone agrees is probably, and agrees without too much debating, is probably a lazy group, or a group where the power of someone prevents others from expressing their own opinions. Right? When do you think that we need when do you think that it's better to have a group of people that are more similar among themselves, and when it's better to have a group that are more heterogeneous for a decision? Which kinds of decisions would benefit from a more diverse group, and which kind of decisions would benefit from a more focused group, focused in the sense of everyone thinking more similarly?
It's my opinion. Sure. But like in technical solutions, like if you need something really technical, that means like really
Uh-huh.
sure. Like you have to know, I don't know, how to create an algorithm, something like
Mm-hmm.
that. And then you have to decide the thing. If you have like a specific type of sample which has
In that
would have some knowledge about that instantly.
Yeah, definitely. The most specific I get with respect to decision, the more I will benefit from specialists in that field, right? And the broader the decision has to be, the more conceptual the decision is, the more I will benefit from people with different perspectives. So if we think about business in general, in a phase of conceptualizing a product, when you're still thinking, it's not even designing yet. Before designing, you're creating that concept for a product. It's good that you have a very diverse group, because each person will come with a completely different mindset and a completely different way of thinking, which will provoke the others to think in a different way than they would if they were among peers, among people that thought exactly like they did. But that would probably lead to a much better design afterwards. But when you get to let's say, when you get to the design and after to the actual implementation, you get to the engineers, right? The engineers, then you say, well, this is the specification, build it, right? And I'm not putting the engineers down by any means. I'm only saying that I'm originally an engineer, although I can't call myself an engineer any longer, I think. But engineers are very good as taking a framed challenge and solving it. But it has to be already framed, right? Who puts that into a frame? If it's an engineer that puts into a frame, maybe then it's too framed. It could be that it becomes a patch, right? A patch on a wall, and not necessarily something new and creative. Okay. Simple versus complex tasks. The ox way, the weight compared to the submarine, right? Apparently, the wisdom of the crowds may have answers for both kinds of situations. What else? And then we get to chapter 1, in which the author discusses, for example, do you remember that show, Who Wants to Be a Millionaire? Here in Brazil we had that in Silvio Santos, right? Something that was similar to that. And I think there was also an Indian movie a few years ago that showed, but basically this is a show in which the participant has to answer questions. They start with easy questions. Questions start becoming more difficult. And then the participant has the chance of calling a friend or calling a specialist or calling or asking the audience for help. I mean, we've all seen that kind of TV show, right? And one curious thing that they measured here was that when the participant asked the experts were able to provide them with the right answer for a question in 65% of the time. When they asked a random crowd, and he mentions here, a random crowd of people with nothing better to do on a weekday afternoon than sit in a TV studio, picked the right answer 91% of the time. Right? It's saying, think of someone who has nothing else to do in life, and then you get a crowd of these people and ask them to vote, and they provided good answers 91% of the time, right? So this is impressive as well. And then it starts telling about some experiments that were made with jelly beans. Last year I brought a jar of jelly beans here and asked the students to guess. I can show you the statistics of what happened last year later. This year I just forgot about it. I mean, I kept thinking during the whole week that I had to buy the candy, but I only remembered that I hadn't done it last night, and then there was no time. And then I thought about something. Does anyone have a book with you? A book, any book. Let's say a notebook, but a book that has... Could I have that for just 1 second? I can't go to there because I'm connected to this. So this will be part of our challenge here. We have this book, right? Oliver's Lex. It is this thick. How many pages does it have? That's one of the questions that I will ask you. I will pass it around, but you have to promise me that you're not going to open the book and check. I will check here. I'll forget until we have to do that. But okay, I don't know how many pages it has. I will do like that, okay, so that you have to have some information, right? So this is the information you have. Okay, I'll pass you around. Let me see if it's not written in the front or anywhere how many pages it has. It's not. So you can look at it, but you'll have to take a guess of how many pages. This will be the jelly beans test that we'll do here, and we'll see if we, as a crowd, are better than a specialist would be, or at least we'll see how good we are. Just pass it along so that people have you have to have some information, right? And for those who are watching us from a distance, you'll probably get a little less information because you'll not be able to handle the book, but I'll show you the book once again. And besides that, I have a few other questions to you. Let me see where they are. I think they are. Let me do something here. Hang on. Let me go back there and see if I can include here another tab. It's going to be bit.do wisdom. Let me see if this will work. Wisdom of crowds. Is this showing? No, it's not showing here. How come? Something wrong here. It's the crowds. For some reason, I'm not being able to show you my screen. Let me try and close this one, and this one, and this one. Try once again. Let me just include window here. No capture. Sorry about this. Well, for some reason, I'm not being able to, so I'll come back to this view. I'm not being able to show you the page that I want you to show, but I want you all to get, to enter a page on the web, which is bit.do. bit.do dash wisdom of crowds. Check if you get there. You should get to this page here. bit.do dash wisdom of crowds. All right, and I have a few questions for you there. The first one, and that's where well, the first one is your name. Okay. The second is, well, I assumed that I am the tallest person in class, and then I ask you to guess how much I weight in kilograms. For those who are watching from a distance, I'll go a little further back so that you can see me. Huh?
Can we know how much are you good?
Can you know what?
Can we know your
I'm 1 meter 92. Okay. Are they seeing me? Let me see what they're seeing here. They will not be able to see you. Maybe I'll go like this, put this to the side, and I'll come here, get this off, to give them a little more information. Right? I have to come close to the, maybe they're not, but 1 meter 92, right? And you have to take a guess on how much I weight. This is an informed, again, it's an informed decision that you're taking because you see me, right? And now you know that how tall I am. bit.do dash wisdom of crowds. Wisdom of crowds. Yeah. That's the first question. Then the second question is, this time I'm doing it a little better. Who's the shortest person in class? Could be you. How tall are you? 160. 160. 153. I think Katielin, come here. What we'll do here, let's see if we will be able to do this. Well, let me see how we'll do this. Katielin, you have to go there. Come here. Oops. And you will, what you'll do, no, what I have to make some, okay. Open your arms to the sides. Will I be able to see? You tell me when it's, I can see there. Let me see. Well, not very good today, but yeah. Oh, this is good. No, like that. Okay, that's Katielin. She's 153, and I want you to guess how much she measures from the finger in one hand to the finger in the other. Is it? Okay, go for it. You know, I chose. This is a question. This is a question that I have changed since previous years. Because when I asked, the first time I asked, I thought I was the tallest person. And then I asked for the shortest person in class. And it was a girl. It tends to be. I mean, men tend to be taller than gross. But then I was very insensible, and I asked, how much does she weigh, right? And let's say the girl in that first class, she was maybe a little stronger than I am. And then you know what happened with the crowds? The crowd was biased. The crowd was nice and biased. And that was where we committed the largest mistake in our assessment, because no one wanted to guess her weight and be right. Everyone wanted to be polite, and I mean, she was not fat or anything, but she was just, you know, it was. So I decided to change the question now and do this thing about the. So you have that, and let's see. Then we have another question. That is, in which year did Nirvana release the album Nevermind? If anyone had checked that during when you were reading, then don't answer. This is the only one that I didn't put as a compulsory answer, because maybe some of you checked it when you read the book, right? If you didn't, even if you're a professional, even if you're a fan, you're entitled. But if you checked exactly which year, then don't answer, because we. And the last question is, how many pages do you think the book has? Where's the book? The book is back? No. Oh, here. So let's give a chance again for people who are watching us. The book is this one, right? How many pages do you guess this book has? Right? After you fill those answers, just submit the form, and maybe we could have a 15-minute break. And then when we come back, I will have some answers here to show to you, okay? And for those of you who are watching us from a distance, after I present the results, just after the break, what we'll do is we'll work on the Moodle, putting there our questions, ideas about this paper, and discussing them in a group, okay? So we'll come back at about 10:10.